Welcome back, dear students. Today, in this paper of drafting of pleadings and conveyance deeds, we will learn the drafting of conveyance deeds. Conveyance deed means where one person transfers his rights to another person by means of a deed. This deed may be, for example, sale deed, gift deed, lease deed, mortgage deed, exchange deed, conveyance deed, or even relinquishment deed. So any kind of conveyancing, that is transfer of rights, can be done with the help of a conveyance deeds. So today we'll take up the background lecture relating to conveyancing of deeds, and you can pick up one or more of these books for your reference for learning the drafting of conveyance deeds. First of all, we'll understand what are the components or parts of a deed. Dear students, a deed consists invariably of at least 7 parts. There are 7 major components of a deed. First and foremost ingredient of a deed is description of the deed. You will have to describe the deed in the beginning, whether you are going to draft a sale deed, or you are going to draft a gift deed, or lease deed, or mortgage deed, or exchange deed, or a relinquishment deed. So you will have to describe the description of the deed in the beginning. It is usual, but not necessary, to begin a deed by giving it a name. The description of the deed can be deciphered from the contents also. But this name has to be chosen with great care. If you are giving a name, it has to be chosen with great care. No deed can be given a name which the parties choose. It is not the desire of the parties or will of the parties to give any name to any deed. Because later on the question of interpretation arises. There are cases where a deed described as sale deed was actually a gift deed, and a gift deed drafted as a gift deed was actually a sale deed. So the question of interpretation may arise later on if you have given a wrong description to the deed. So for interpreting a deed, the terms and the general purpose of the same will have to be looked into, and not the nomenclature which the parties choose to give to the deed. So it is a pith and substance which will tell you the nature of the deed. But if you have given a heading and the contents are different, then again the pith and substance of the deed will have to be seen so as to decipher the nature of the deed. So first ingredient, first component, first part of the deed is description and its name. Second is date of the deed. You know, date is very important. It is usual to give that date on which a deed is executed, either after the name or at the end, before the actual signatures are made. This date has no reference to the date on which the deed may come into effect. It is a date of drafting. But if no other date is given, then it will be presumed that the date of execution is the date on which the deed shall come into force. But there are certain deeds like will deed or wasiyat. You write a will on behalf of your client today, and this will deed will come into operation on the death of your client. So date of drafting and date of execution are two different things. Date of execution may be one, and date of coming into effect may be different. So second component of the deed is date of the deed. Then third parties to the deed. You will have to describe the name of the seller, name of the purchaser with complete parentage, age and address. My dear students, some documents are drafted unilaterally. They are known as unilateral documents, whereas others are drafted like multilateral, bilateral documents also. Say for example, sale deed. Sale deed can be drafted unilaterally also because it is a seller who has to sell the property. The signature of the seller are important, not the signature of purchaser. So sale deed can be drafted in a unilateral fashion also and bilateral fashion also, where the signatures of seller as well as purchaser both are obtained on the sale deed. And if there are more than two partners, suppose there is a partnership firm, there are four partners and a partnership deed is to be written, then all the four partners will sign it and deed will be known as multilateral deed. So dear students, universal deeds are executed only by one party, and such deed is also known as deed poll, like power of attorney, bond, bail bond, will or wasiyyat. They fall in this category because they are drafted unilaterally by one party. If I am giving power of attorney in your favor, only I am to sign it. If I am giving a surety bond, only I am to sign it. If I am writing a wasiyyat, only I am to sign it. But in India, it is quite legal and usual to have mortgages, sales, and gifts also executed by one party only. In gift deed also, I told you, the signature of donor are important. Donor may give his acceptance otherwise also, besides signing the gift deed. Under section 106 of Transfer of Property Act, leases have to be bilateral document. Lease deed has to be signed by lessor as well as lessee both. Parties to a deed have to be described with correctness and sufficiency, which might make them identifiable at any future date. In India, it is usual to describe parties by their name, age, parentage, and residential address. Caste was at one time necessary ingredient of the identification of the person, but since our country has become secular in nature now, so mentioning of the caste in describing a person is out of fashion nowadays, rather it is not needed. So this is the third component, parties to the deed with complete identifiable details. Fourth portion of the deed is recitals. Recital contain a brief history or in short form, the motive for the making of a deed. History means if I am making a gift deed, how I became the owner of the property. If I am executing a sale deed, how I am owner of the property which I am going to sell. And what is the motive for making the deed? Motive is sale or gift or lease or exchange. And these recitals usually begin with the use of the word whereas. You will write down, whereas the seller is the absolute owner of the property. So these paragraphs usually begin with the word whereas and show the reason and history by which the present grantor or grantors have come to be able to make the grant intended. And this must be shown in such a manner so as to show a complete unbroken chain and in such order that they shall be properly connected and consistent. Suppose I am selling a property. I purchased this property from A had purchased it from B, and B had purchased it from the C, who was the original owner. So you are supposed to write down in the recitals the title of C, D, and A. There should be a connection between these three documents, which is to be mentioned in the column of recitals, beginning with the word whereas. Then fifth portion of the deed is testatum. Testatum generally starts with the testimonial clause, and the paragraph begins with now therefore this deed witnesses that. Testatum is that portion of a deed That contains the statement of consideration, say 1 crore rupees, and words incorporating covenant for title and operative words. In this part of the deed, the grantor or grantors convey in proper capacity or capacities the property intended to be transferred. The testatum usually begins with the words, as I told you, now this deed witnesses that, and contains the consideration also for which the transfer is made, that is 1 crore rupees, and the acknowledgement of its receipt. Suppose purchaser has paid a sum of rupees 10 lakh. So seller will acknowledge its receipt that he has received a sum of rupees 10 lakh by means of check number so and so. And this testatum usually contains operative words. Operative words means words like grants, agrees, confirms, sells, transfers, conveys, assigns. These are the usual words used to denote the purpose of the deed. If I am writing a gift deed, then I will write down, I hereby grant this property to my wife. If I am selling, I hereby sell. If I am transferring by other modes, I hereby transfer and convey and assign all the rights which I have in this property to my wife. So these are the operative words in the testatum clause. Then parcel of the land. Parcel of the property is also a component of the deed. This parcel means this is our description of the property which is the subject of transfer. And greatest care has to be taken in describing the property, and it is usual to add a schedule of property or an annexure in which the property is accurately and correctly described in such a manner as to be easily identifiable by boundaries. Boundaries means what is situated in the north of the property to be sold, what is situated in the south, west, and east of the property to be sold. And number of properties also to be mentioned, like flat number 906 Designers Park. Or if it is a case of agricultural land, then khasra number, khatani number, that is official record with the state government. So number of that property in a record of settlement or survey is to be mentioned. And the document should specify such boundaries or numbers. If the property affronts a road, street, or a park, or if it is occupied by a tenant, the name of the road, street, park, or tenant should also be given. A plan may be attached and made part of the deed. Plan is also part of the deed. My dear students, this property to be sold, to be transferred, should be very, very cautiously mentioned in the deed, because I have witnessed that maybe 1/4 of the litigation in our country arises because of bad drafting of the deeds, ill drafting of the deeds, wherein the property transferred is not correctly mentioned. Its dimensions are not mentioned. Length and breadth of the plot to be sold is not mentioned, and how the property is bounded and putted on all the 4 sides is not correctly written. So this is very, very important duty as an advocate on your part to write down the correct parcel of land as to what is going to be transferred by this deed. Then third portion of testatum clause is habendum. Habendum is a clause in the deed that defines the type of interest and rights to be enjoyed by the grantee or lessee. What rights are being conveyed to the other party? This part of the deed usually begins with the words to have and to hold. Say I have gifted my property to my wife, so I will write, now the donee to have and hold the property the way she likes. But the modern practice is to omit these words. The draftsmen are not writing these words, but they should be written, because the purpose of the habendum clause is to define the interest conveyed to the transferee. Whether the transfer is merely a life interest or creation of a trust or an absolute sale. Sometimes I am transferring only life interest in favor of my unborn child. I can do that according to provisions of Transfer of Property Act. Or I may create trust also. Or I may execute an absolute sale deed also. So this has to be very clearly mentioned in the deed. And if the property transferred is encumbered somewhere, suppose I am selling a flat, but I had taken a loan from State Bank of India, and that loan is still subsisting. So that encumbrance has to be clearly mentioned in the deed. And if it is not encumbered, then a clear statement to this effect must go in the addendum clause that property is free from all encumbrances. And if there is some loan or encumbrance on it, it must be written in the deed as such. Then fourth part of this testatum is exceptions and reservations. Sometimes I transfer the property but I keep certain reservations with me. So those exceptions and reservations are to be made a part of the deed very clearly. So in this part of the deed, all exceptions and reservations which are intended to be attached to the transfer should be clearly stated. For example, if it is desired to lease out a parcel of land, the transferor may desire to retain the right to extract minerals therefrom, or again a person may reserve the right of way, that is easementary right, which must be clearly set forth in this part of the deed that I am selling this property to the purchaser, but since I was using this plot of land, I was using my easementary right of way over this plot. So I keep this reservation with me that in spite of selling this plot, in spite of giving it on lease to other party, I will use this easementary right as I was using before this deed also. So all those exceptions and reservations are to be mentioned in the deed. Then comes the covenants. Covenant means a formal agreement or promise, and whatever the terms and conditions agreed between the parties, all those covenants are to be mentioned in the deed. So almost every document, whether a sale, lease, or mortgage, should contain the terms by which the parties bind themselves. It is not necessary to mention such covenants as are attached by law to a particular transaction. But if any special terms or agreements are made at variance with the implied covenants, then these must be clearly stated in the deed. Take for example, my dear students, that a lease under Transfer of Property Act implies a right to sublet. But the parties may impose conditions against subletting also. In such a case, the terms must clearly be given in the deed that lessee shall have no right to sublet this property. So all those terms and conditions have to be mentioned in the deed very clearly. Then comes the testimonial clause. This testimonium means concluding part of a contract or deed or other legal instrument which states that the instrument has been signed or executed on the stated date by the parties. And this usually begins with the words in witness whereof, because two witnesses are required to be mentioned in the deed. So in witness whereof, the parties aforesaid, namely so and so, have on the day, month, and year just above mentioned, put their respective signatures before the witnesses present. The testimonium set forth that parties have signed the deed. This is a proof that seller and purchaser both have signed the deed in the presence of witnesses, and two witnesses have signed this deed in presence of each other. This is the requirement of Transfer of Property Act, that parties will sign the deed in the presence of witnesses and witnesses will sign in the presence of each other. Then lastly comes signature and attestation. Attestation is an act of authenticating a document by observing its execution at the request of the party signing the document and then signing it as a witness. The deed finally requires the signatures of contracting parties as also the signatures of attesting witnesses. It is necessary for the executant and witnesses to sign in each other's presence. And my dear students, besides these 7 components of a deed, nowadays the mentioning of photograph of seller and purchaser and photograph of 2 witnesses to be affixed on the document is also part of the deed, essential part of the deed. And then mentioning the Aadhaar number of seller, purchaser and 2 witnesses, and affixing a photostat copy of the Aadhaar card, putting their email addresses also, and putting their mobile numbers also is also part of the deed. And of late, the photograph of the building which is to be sold, photograph of the plot of land, rather geotagged photograph of the plot of land is to be attached along with the deed so that there may not be location disputes in future. So, my dear students, these are the main components or main parts of the deed. When you will start drafting of any deed, you will have to keep in mind all these components or all these parts of the deed. So, thank you very much, dear students. God bless you all.